Ezekiel Hartman had lived alone for so long that silence had become a part of him. Every morning, before the sun even touched the distant red cliffs, he stepped out of his wooden house and breathed in the cool desert air. The place was wide, open, and empty just how he had kept it for years. His ranch stretched for miles across the Arizona land, and the only sounds he usually heard were the soft mooing of cattle, the rustle of dry grass, and the distant call of a hawk. People in town often said he moved like a man carrying a weight no one else could see. They were right. After losing his wife to illness many years ago, Ezekiel no longer laughed easily. He spoke little, kept to himself, and poured his entire soul into the ranch so his mind wouldn't drown in memories. Some days, he wondered if his heart had quietly turned to stone from loneliness, but still, he kept going, fixing fences, feeding animals, repairing old tools, because work was the only thing that gave him structure. The ranch was peaceful during the day, but the nights were different. When darkness fell and everything became still, Ezekiel sometimes felt the silence pressing against him, reminding him of the empty chair across the dinner table and the untouched quilts his late wife had made. Even after all these years, a soft ache still lived inside him, like a shadow he could not shake off. One afternoon, when the sky turned yellowish and the wind began picking up dust, Ezekiel could sense a storm coming. Desert storms moved fast. One moment the sky was calm, and the next it could roar with fierce winds carrying sand and dry leaves. Ezekiel hurried outside, gathering loose tools, tying down anything that could fly away, and making sure the animals were safe. The wind grew stronger, sweeping across the open land with such force that he had to shield his eyes from the flying dust. As he closed the barn door, something caught his attention at the far end of his property. Something moving, stumbling, almost collapsing. At first, he thought it might be one of his stray cattle, but the shape was too upright. The wind carried dust so thick that it was hard to see clearly. Curious and concerned, Ezekiel walked toward the figure, feeling the sandy wind push against him. As he got closer, the shape became clearer. A person. A young woman, tall and built with broad shoulders, struggling to walk through the storm. She looked like she had been walking for a long time. Her clothes were partly traditional Apache wear, decorated beads, leather pieces, and earrings that glinted faintly even in the dusty air. Her long dark hair stuck to her face from sweat and storm dust. Before Ezekiel could even call out to her, the woman's legs gave way. She collapsed onto the dry ground with a soft thud. Ezekiel rushed forward. "Hey, can you hear me?" he said, kneeling beside her. She didn't answer, but her chest rose and fell weakly. Ezekiel was not the kind of man to ignore someone in need. Without hesitation, he lifted her carefully in his arms. She was surprisingly heavy, not in a burdensome way, but in a strong, solid way that made him realize she was much taller and sturdier than most women he had ever seen. Even in her unconscious state, she carried an air of presence. The storm was getting worse, so Ezekiel hurried back to the house with her. Dust stung his face, and the wind whipped at his hat, almost pulling it off. But he kept his grip tight on the young woman he carried. When he finally reached the house, he kicked the door shut with his foot, blocking out most of the storm. He laid her gently on the couch. The dim light showed more details of her appearance, her height, the strong shape of her arms, and the cultural markings on her bracelets. She looked like someone who belonged to a world far older and deeper than the modern one. Ezekiel fetched water and a clean cloth. He wet the cloth and gently wiped her face. After a few moments, her eyelids fluttered. Her eyes opened slowly, revealing a calm but tired gaze. "You're safe," Ezekiel said softly. "Storm's outside. You fainted." She blinked a few times, trying to focus. When she finally gathered her breath, she whispered, "Water. Please." He handed her a cup immediately. She drank slowly, her throat clearly dry from walking in the desert heat. "Thank you," she said after finishing. Her voice was soft but steady, hinting at strength beneath exhaustion. "What happened to you?" Ezekiel asked gently. She took a moment before answering. "My name is Ayana," she said, her voice still low. "I'm from the Apache reservation." Ezekiel nodded. The reservation wasn't too far, maybe a couple hours' walk through the rough land, but walking through a storm like this was dangerous. You shouldn't be out there alone, he said. Especially in a storm. You could have been hurt worse. Ayanna looked down, her expression carrying a mix of shame and sadness. I had to leave. I needed space from my people. From everything. Ezekiel didn't press for details. He knew well that some stories needed time before they could be told. For the next hour, he let her rest. She sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, quietly observing the interior of his home, the wooden shelves, the old lamp, the small kitchen table, and the boots by the door. Everything in the house looked simple and worn, like it belonged to someone who favored quiet over comfort. Ayanna eventually spoke again. Thank you for helping me. Not everyone would have stopped. Ezekiel shrugged lightly. Storm like that? Anyone would have helped. She gave him a soft, grateful smile. Not everyone, she said. Her words stayed with him. As the storm raged outside, they slowly talked. Ayanna explained that she had been walking since morning, carrying only a small bag with her. She said she had argued with some of the elders in her village. They expected her to follow a certain path, one she felt didn't fit her spirit. Being unusually tall and strong, she often became the center of unwanted attention. Some people admired her. Others judged her. She felt like she could never be just herself. Ezekiel listened quietly. He wasn't good with words, but he was good at listening. And Ayanna seemed to need that more than anything. You can stay here until the storm passes, he said. It's not safe to travel right now. Ayanna nodded. Thank you. I don't want to be a burden. You're not, he replied. That night, when the storm finally softened to a distant rumble, Ezekiel made a small meal, simple soup and bread. Ayanna ate with slow gratitude, as if she wasn't just filling her stomach, but also warming something deeper inside her. As she rested again, she looked around the quiet house. You live alone? She asked. For years now, he answered. She didn't ask why. The sadness in his voice spoke for itself. Outside, the desert slowly calmed. But inside the house, an unexpected sense of connection. Settled, gentle, unspoken, and peaceful. Ezekiel didn't understand it fully yet. Ayanna didn't either. But something had shifted. A lonely rancher and a wandering Apache girl had crossed paths in a simple, yet powerful moment of need. In that warm little room, with the last echoes of the storm fading away, both felt perhaps for the first time in a long while that they were no longer entirely alone in the world. It was just a beginning, quiet but meaningful, like a spark that promised something deeper ahead. The next morning, when soft sunlight finally pushed through the thin curtains, Ezekiel woke up earlier than usual. He wasn't sure if it was the habit of his ranch life or the thought of having someone else under his roof after so many years. For a moment, he just sat on the edge of his bed, listening to the quiet inside the house. It felt different, warmer somehow. He walked to the living room where he had left Ayanna resting the night before. To his relief, she was still asleep, wrapped in the blanket. Her long hair rested peacefully across the pillow. Without the storm and exhaustion on her face, she looked calmer, like a young woman who had simply walked too far for too long. Ezekiel moved quietly, not wanting to wake her. He lit the stove and started preparing breakfast. The smell of warm food filled the small kitchen. And soon enough, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Ayanna stood there, looking slightly embarrassed. Good morning, she said in a gentle voice. Morning, Ezekiel replied, nodding. Feel better? A little. Thank you for letting me stay. He served her a plate of eggs and bread. She hesitated for a moment before taking a seat at the wooden table. Ezekiel noticed how carefully she moved, as if she wasn't used to being in someone else's space. She sat with a kind of respectful awareness, her posture straight, her eyes observing everything quietly. As they ate, she finally spoke again. I know I didn't explain everything last night. I was too tired. See, you don't have to explain anything, Ezekiel said simply. But Ayanna shook her head. I want to. You helped me when you didn't have to. She took a slow breath before continuing. as if gathering courage. My people believe in harmony. We believe that every person has a path in life. But sometimes the elders decide what that path should look like, and they expect you to follow it even if it doesn't feel right to your heart. Ezekiel listened with full attention. For most of my life, she said softly, I felt like I didn't fit in. I'm taller than most Apache men and women. Stronger too. Some admired it. But others, they treated me like I was strange, different, not normal. She looked down at her hands, the memory still painful. Some said I should use my strength for certain roles in the tribe. They wanted me to train for tasks I never asked for. Others expected me to marry someone I didn't want to marry. I kept trying to explain that I just wanted to live quietly, learn, and choose my own way. But every time I tried to speak, it felt like they heard only what they wanted to hear. Her voice carried no anger, just exhaustion. I didn't run away, she continued. I just walked out to clear my mind. I planned to come back the same day. But the more I walked, the more I felt like the world outside was bigger than the one I kept trying to fit into. Before I knew it, I was far from home, and the storm caught me. Ezekiel nodded slowly. Sounds like you've been carrying a lot. Ayanna met his eyes. I didn't want to trouble you with my problems. You're not troubling me, he said, surprising even himself with the honesty in his tone. Ayanna seemed touched by his words. She took another bite of breakfast, and for a moment, the silence between them felt peaceful instead of awkward. After breakfast, Ezekiel needed to check on the ranch animals. Ayanna insisted on helping, even though he told her she should rest. I can work, she said firmly. It will help me clear my head. He couldn't argue with that. So together, they stepped outside. The desert looked fresh after the storm, wet patches of sand, scattered leaves, and a cool breeze that carried the scent of damp earth. Ayanna followed Ezekiel to the barn. As soon as they entered, the horses stirred. Ezekiel began checking each stall, making sure the animals had water and weren't hurt from the storm's noise. Ayanna watched for a moment, curiosity bright in her eyes. Then she approached one of the horses, a brown mare with a gentle temperament. Ayanna moved slowly, letting the mare sniff her hand before gently stroking its neck. She likes you, Ezekiel said. I've always been good with animals, she replied. They don't judge. They only feel. Her simple words made Ezekiel pause. He had never thought of it that way. But she was right. Animals didn't ask who you were supposed to be. They only responded to kindness. After checking the barn, they walked toward the pasture to mend a large section of fence damaged by the storm. Ezekiel began pulling out his tools, expecting the repairs to take hours, but to his quiet surprise, Ayanna knelt beside him and worked with a speed and strength that amazed him. She lifted heavy posts easily, held planks steady without struggling, and hammered nails into the wood with smooth, practiced movements. You've done this before? Ezekiel asked. She gave a small smile. My father taught me. He said, strength is a gift only when used with patience. Ezekiel found himself studying her more closely than he intended. She wasn't just tall and strong, she carried herself with calm confidence. Her presence felt grounded, steady, like the earth after rain. As they worked side by side, the hours slipped by quickly. Ezekiel realized he hadn't had company like this in years. The ranch felt different with someone else walking across the land. Someone who wasn't afraid of hard work or silence. At midday, they took a break under the shade of an old tree. Ayanna drank water while looking at the wide horizon stretching endlessly in front of them. This land is peaceful, she said. Even when it's lonely. It is lonely, Ezekiel admitted. Ayanna glanced at him gently. You've lived alone for a long time? Too long, he answered. She didn't pry. But there was something in her eyes that told him she understood the kind of loneliness that didn't show on the outside but lived quietly in the heart. When they returned to the house later, Ezekiel made lunch. While they ate, they talked more slowly at first, then with surprising openness. Ayanna told him about the stories her grandmother used to share. Stories about the stars, the wind, and the spirit of the land. Ezekiel listened like a man hearing something precious and unfamiliar. Her words painted pictures he had never seen before, beautiful, mysterious, full of meaning. In return, Ezekiel shared small pieces of his life, things he hadn't spoken about in years. He told her about his late wife, how gentle she was, how she loved the open sky, how she died far too young. Ayanna listened with quiet respect, giving him the space to speak without pity. "You've carried her memory with honor," Ayanna said softly. "But you've also carried your pain alone for too long." Her words were not meant to comfort, they were simply true. And for the first time, Ezekiel didn't feel the need to hide from that truth. As the sun set, coloring the desert sky in shades of gold and orange, Ayanna stepped outside the house and looked toward the distant cliffs. Ezekiel joined her in silence. "The world is so wide," she murmured. "Maybe wider than the fears that hold us." Ezekiel looked at her, not just at her height or strength, but at the thoughtful, gentle expression on her face. She was young, yet her spirit felt old and wise. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need," he said quietly. Ayanna turned toward him, surprise softening her features. "I won't forget this kindness." "It's not kindness," he replied. "It's just the right thing to do." Ayanna smiled, a soft, grateful smile that somehow filled the empty spaces of the ranch with a new warmth. They stood there for a long time, watching the colors fade and the first stars appear. No words were needed. The silence felt different now. Less heavy, less lonely. And though neither of them said it out loud, both sensed that their lives had quietly shifted in a way they did not yet fully understand. The days that followed settled into a quiet but comforting rhythm. Ayanna had planned to stay only until she gathered her strength, but somehow each morning came with new reasons for her to remain a little longer. The ranch, once silent and still like an old memory, now felt alive in a way Ezekiel had forgotten was possible. Every sunrise found them outside together. Ezekiel would step onto the porch with his coffee, and without fail, Ayanna would already be standing near the fence, watching the changing colors of the sky. She loved the early mornings, the cool air, the quiet, the feeling that the world was waking gently. "You wake earlier than I do," Ezekiel said one morning. Ayanna smiled softly. "My people say dawn carries messages for those who listen. I guess I grew up believing that." Ezekiel didn't fully understand her words, but the peaceful tone she used made him feel something he hadn't felt in years, calmness without loneliness. After breakfast, the two of them would head out to work. Ayanna helped with everything: feeding the cattle, carrying bales of hay, cleaning the barn, repairing anything that needed fixing. She worked with patience and strength, never rushing, never complaining. Ezekiel often found himself watching her from a distance, surprised at how naturally she fit into the ranch life. One afternoon, while fixing a broken gate, Ezekiel noticed a group of horses acting restless. Before he could react, one of the young colts kicked its stall door hard enough to break the latch and bolted into the open field. Ezekiel was about to chase after it, but Ayanna was already moving. She ran after the colt with stunning speed for someone her size. Her long legs carried her easily across the grass. Ezekiel watched in amazement as she approached the frightened colt, slowed her pace, and began speaking softly in her native language. Her voice was gentle, steady, almost like a song. The colt, nervous at first, gradually calmed down. When it finally stopped running, Ayanna reached out and placed her hand on its neck. The animal didn't pull away. Instead, it lowered its head, accepting her presence. She walked it back to the ranch with a proud but humble smile. "How did you do that?" Ezekiel asked as she returned. Ayanna shrugged lightly. "Animals understand fear, not words. When they see someone who isn't afraid, they settle." Ezekiel looked at her differently after that. Not just as someone passing through, but someone who carried a kind of wisdom rare to find. As the days turned into weeks, Ayanna began to reveal more about herself. She told Ezekiel stories about the traditions she grew up with, about her grandmother who taught her how to read the sky and understand the wind. She shared memories from her childhood, running barefoot across the reservation fields, learning to carve wood with her father, helping her mother grind corn for meals. Ezekiel listened quietly, often mesmerized by her words. He rarely spoke so much about his own life, But when he did, Ayana listened with complete attention. She never rushed him, never judged, and never tried to fill the silence with unnecessary noise. Her presence made it easy for Ezekiel to open pieces of his heart he thought had closed forever. One evening, when the desert sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, Ezekiel and Ayana sat outside near the old fire pit. The gentle breeze brushed past them, carrying the scent of warm earth. Ayana poked at the small fire they had built, watching the sparks rise into the air like glowing insects. "You know," she said softly, "for the first time in a long while, I feel peaceful." Ezekiel looked at her. "This place can do that to a person." "It's not just the place," she whispered, her eyes focused on the flames. She paused, then added in a voice barely above a whisper, "Back home, people see my height before they see my heart." The sadness in her voice tugged at something deep inside Ezekiel. He knew what it felt like to be misunderstood. He had spent years living behind invisible walls, avoiding people because the world seemed too loud and too full of expectations. "You don't have to explain yourself here," he said quietly. "Not to me." Ayana turned her head slightly to look at him. Her eyes reflected the flickering firelight. Warm and deep. "That's why it feels like home," she said. Her words made Ezekiel's chest feel heavy in a strange, unfamiliar way, not painful, but full, as if something long forgotten had woken up. The evening stretched on, filled with gentle conversation and comfortable silence. Eventually, the fire died down to glowing embers. A cold breeze drifted across the land, making Ayana pull her blanket closer. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "I want to say something, but I don't want it to sound strange." Ezekiel looked at her calmly. "You can tell me anything." She took a slow breath. "I'm longing for a man's warmth." Ezekiel froze, not because her words were improper, but because he was unsure what she meant. She noticed his silence, and quickly added, "I don't mean anything wrong. I mean warmth of the heart, the warmth of being understood, respected, cared for. I've felt alone for so long that I forgot how it feels when someone truly sees me." Her voice cracked just slightly on the last words, but she stayed strong. "It's not about wanting romance, not about wanting someone to claim me. I just want human closeness that feels safe, kindness that feels real." Ezekiel let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Her words were not bold, they were honest, pure, and filled with a tenderness he hadn't heard in years. "I understand," he said quietly. "Do you?" she asked, her gaze searching his face. He nodded. "More than you think. After my wife passed, I shut myself away. I forgot what it felt like to talk to someone without feeling the weight of the past. You've brought something back into this place, and into me." Ayana's eyes softened at his admission. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched gently, like a blanket resting across the night. The stars appeared slowly above them, one by one. Over time, their bond grew deeper, formed not by dramatic gestures but by everyday moments. Ayana brushing the horses while humming soft songs from her childhood. Ezekiel showing her how to mend saddles or fix an old wagon wheel. The two of them sharing quiet meals, talking about simple things like the shape of the clouds or the smell of fresh rain. The nearby town began to notice Ayana's presence on the ranch. When Ezekiel rode into town for supplies, whispers followed him. Some people were curious, others judgmental. But Ezekiel ignored them. He had lived long enough to understand that people always talked, whether they knew the truth or not. One afternoon, after he returned from town, he found Ayana sitting on the porch with an unreadable expression. "You heard them, didn't you?" she asked gently. Ezekiel didn't bother denying it. "It doesn't matter." Ayana studied him. "People fear what they don't understand. Let them fear," he replied. She smiled softly. "You're braver than you think." "No," he said. "I've just lived long enough to know whose opinions matter." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, trust, maybe even admiration. As more time passed, the ranch no longer felt like a place with empty rooms and quiet corners. Ayana's presence filled those spaces with warmth. Ezekiel found himself looking forward to their conversations, to the sound of her steady footsteps, to the calm strength she brought into his life. And Ayana, for the first time since she could remember, felt seen for who she truly was. Not for her height, her strength, or the expectations placed upon her, but for her heart. In that quiet desert, two lonely souls found something neither had expected: companionship born from understanding, and a closeness that felt gentle, steady, and healing. The world outside might judge them. Their lives were different, their backgrounds far apart. But on that ranch, under the wide open sky, they found a connection that needed no explanation. It was a bond quietly forming in the space between words, warm, honest, and meant to last. The morning the message arrived, the sky was unusually still. Ezekiel had just finished feeding the cattle when he noticed a dust cloud rising in the distance. A single rider from the reservation was approaching the ranch at a steady pace. Ezekiel wiped his hands on his shirt, not knowing whether to feel worried or curious. Ayana, who was gathering tools near the barn, also noticed the rider. Her body stiffened slightly, her eyes narrowing with quiet concern. The rider, an older Apache man with streaks of gray hair and calm eyes, slowed his horse near the fence. Ayana walked toward him with a mixture of respect and hesitation. "Ayana," the man said in a gentle tone, "your people have been worried." Ayana lowered her head respectfully. "I only meant to walk, not disappear." The man nodded. "Your mother asked me to come. She wants you home, or at least to know you are safe." Ezekiel stood a short distance away, giving them space. But even from where he stood, he could sense the heaviness in the air. Ayana's calm presence suddenly felt uncertain, as if her heart was being pulled in two different directions. The rider glanced at Ezekiel before speaking again. "We will not force you. But the elders want peace. They want to understand why you left without a word." "See," and Ayana took a deep breath, her expression carrying the weight of many thoughts. "Tell my mother. Tell her I'm safe, and tell her I will come home soon to speak with everyone." The rider nodded, turned his horse, and rode away, leaving behind a swirl of dust and silence. Ayana stood there for a long moment before walking back toward the barn. Ezekiel followed her quietly, giving her time. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "You don't have to explain anything," he said. Ayana looked at him with tired eyes, the kind that revealed she had been hiding a storm inside her for longer than anyone realized. "I knew they would look for me," she said. "I didn't expect them to send someone this soon." "You should talk to them," Ezekiel said gently. "They're your family." "I know." She looked away toward the desert horizon. "But I don't know how to go back without losing the small piece I have found here." Ezekiel didn't know what to say to that. For the first time since she arrived, he felt fear not for himself, but for the possibility of losing the quiet companionship he had grown used to. Still, he didn't want to hold her back. She deserved clarity. She deserved to make her choice freely. The next days passed quietly. Ayana helped with the ranch work, but her mind often drifted. Ezekiel watched her from a distance, knowing she was fighting an inner conflict. Finally, one evening, she came to him as he sat on the porch. "I need to go back," she said softly. Ezekiel nodded, even though his chest tightened at the words. "I figured." She took a step closer. "But I'm not going back to stay. I just need to speak to them, face them, explain myself." She paused. "I don't want to run from them forever." Ezekiel looked into her eyes, and he could see the strength returning to them. "You're doing the right thing." Ayana smiled faintly. "Will you be here when I return?" The question caught him off guard. It was simple, yet it held so much weight. "I'll be here," he said quietly. "This ranch isn't going anywhere." Ayana exhaled in relief, as if she had feared he would push her away. The next morning, she packed a small bag. Before leaving, she walked across the land, touching the horses gently, running her fingers along the wooden fence she had helped repair, and standing for a long moment under the old tree where they had shared stories. Ezekiel watched from the porch, feeling a strange ache in his heart. The ranch had changed with her here. And he knew it would feel emptier once she left, even if she promised to return. Ayanna approached him before stepping onto the road. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me a place to breathe, for treating me like someone worth understanding." "You are worth understanding," he replied. Ayanna looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes soft, warm, and full of meaning. Then she turned and walked toward the reservation path. Ezekiel stood on the porch long after she disappeared into the distance. The days that followed were quiet again, quiet in a way Ezekiel hadn't felt in months. The ranch returned to its old rhythm, but something felt incomplete. The morning sky still turned orange, the cattle still needed feeding, the chores still filled his day, but everything felt heavier without Ayanna's presence. He tried not to think about when she'd return, or if the elders would convince her to stay. He didn't want to be selfish. He only hoped she would follow the path that made her heart feel free. Meanwhile, at the reservation, Ayanna faced long conversations with the elders and emotional talks with her family. She explained her feelings, how she felt suffocated by expectations, how she yearned to choose her own path, and how her wandering was not an act of rebellion, but an attempt to find balance within herself. Some elders were strict and questioned her decisions. Others listened with understanding. Her mother cried not from anger, but from relief that her daughter was safe. Ayanna stayed for several weeks, helping with community tasks, sharing meals, reconnecting with her responsibilities, and patiently explaining her desire for independence. Slowly, the tension eased. The tribe understood she wasn't abandoning them, she was simply finding her own place in the world. And when she finally told them she wished to return to the ranch for a while, they didn't try to stop her. Her mother placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Go where your spirit feels whole," she said. "Just don't forget you have a home here too." Clang. Clang ro. Clang. Ayanna promised she would visit, not out of duty, but out of love. When she eventually started her journey back to Ezekiel's ranch, the desert wind felt soft against her face. She carried a small bundle of gifts from her family, things she wanted to share with the man who had shown her unexpected kindness. Meanwhile, Ezekiel was repairing the fence near the east pasture when he saw a figure approaching in the distance. At first, he thought it was a passing traveler or one of the ranch hands from town. But as the figure came closer, walking with confident steps and tall posture, his heart gave a sudden, quiet jump. It was Ayanna. Her long hair flowed with the wind, and her steady gaze was fixed on the ranch she had missed. Ezekiel dropped the tools he was holding without realizing it. Ayanna stopped in front of him. "I'm home," she said softly. Ezekiel felt a warmth spread through his chest. He didn't smile often, but now he couldn't help it. "Welcome back." Ayanna looked around, her eyes taking in everything. The land, the animals, the house where she had rediscovered her own strength. "The elders understand now," she said. "They want me to choose my path with a calm heart." "And what path did you choose?" Ezekiel asked, though his voice was quiet, almost afraid of hoping. Ayanna stepped closer, her expression full of peaceful certainty. "The path that brought me here," she said. "This place feels right. And being near someone who listens without judgment, that feels even more right." End quote. Ezekiel didn't answer right away. Words seemed too small for the feeling rising inside him. Ayanna lifted a small wooden carving from her bag, a traditional Apache symbol of protection and harmony. "My mother wanted you to have this," she said. "She said homes grow stronger when two souls share the same respect." Ezekiel accepted the gift with quiet gratitude. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," she replied. They stood side by side, facing the open land. The desert wind blew gently around them. The ranch felt alive again, filled with possibility. Neither of them needed promises or titles. They simply needed understanding, and that was enough. Together, they walked back to the porch, where the future waited quietly, ready to unfold in its own peaceful time. Their bond, formed through respect, trust, and gentle closeness, was stronger than loneliness, stronger than fear, and strong enough to guide them toward whatever came next.